Good evening and welcome. I'm Roy Blitzer and our show is Ask Dr. Business. The purpose of our time together is to give information and insight to help make your work life a little bit better. The desired outcome is you're going to take this information and use it to have a more satisfied and rewarding career. We're continuing our series on jobs that require travel, and we're very fortunate this evening to have a professional photographer with us, Mark Tuschman, who in his entire career has been traveling extensively. Welcome, Mark.
Oh, glad to be here, Roy.
I wanted to remind everyone to please call in. The phone number here is 650-856-1491. Let's begin by having you tell our audience a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up? Where did you study? And how did you get interested in photography?
Well, I grew up in New York and actually grew up on the Lower East Side in a tenement. And that's important because it actually greatly influenced my photography, because I really, from a young age, saw how people struggled when they were immigrants and just trying to get by.
Got to see the raw life.
Yeah, so that's something that always really stayed with me. And the photography was basically my second career. And actually, I've had two careers in photography, and I'll tell you about that.
Please.
But I almost have a PhD in biomedical engineering and computer science, but when I was in grad school and working on my thesis, it wasn't going very well. So by complete chance, fate, you know, a colleague of mine was from India, and he went back and forth a lot. And he was going to Hong Kong, and he asked me, do I want anything? And I said, well, why don't you get me a camera? So he did. And another colleague of mine had a complete darkroom set up, and they had a lot of freedom in grad school, and my thesis was going nowhere. And they had a beautiful wife and a new puppy, and I started taking pictures, and I felt like, gee, this is fun, and I'm getting results. And one thing you learn when you're in grad school is you learn how to learn. So I learned all the Ansel Adams stuff and all the darkroom stuff. And then I started looking at photographs, especially photographs of a lot of social documentary work. And I thought, gee, I could do better than that. Anyway, it was about 10 years before I actually made the transition into actually being a photographer. And
did you always travel when you started off?
No, no. In fact, I started, I actually made the career switch when my son was born.
Well, that's risky.
That was really risky, but I figured, well, does he want a father who's happy or unhappy? So I decided to do some work that I thought was satisfying. And I did make a conscious decision to, at that point, not try to follow National Geographic route of being a photographer, because I felt that if I did that, I would never be home. I would be gone, and I wanted to see my son grow up and, you know, have a family life. So being here, well, I should take a little step backwards, but I actually tried to be a fine art social documentary photographer, but I realized that I wasn't earning any money.
Was that in the Bay Area, though?
Yeah,
Okay.
It's all in the Bay Area. And so when I made the switch, I decided, okay, I'm just going to do commercial work, and I was here in Silicon Valley, so I just started doing corporate work. But that actually evolved into like higher and bigger jobs over a course of time. And I wound up basically supporting myself by doing a lot of annual reports for big corporations.
But still no traveling.
Oh, no, all the annual reports involved a lot of traveling.
So where have you been and where did you go?
Well, okay, for the annual reports, that was mostly in the United States, but occasionally it would be in Europe. And the biggest job I had abroad, I think, for the annual report was, I think I spent 5, 6 weeks in Asia.
Wow, so you were gone 5 weeks.
5 weeks, yeah. And I enjoyed that. It was fun, you know. And it's is a lot different than traveling in the United States because you get to see a lot more interesting things as a photographer.
So you went from the commercial annual report world to the world of nonprofits? Is that?
Well, it was a transition. I was still doing corporate commercial work and advertising work, but as I mentioned to you earlier, my heart was always in doing social documentary work because I always felt like photography should be used to raise people's consciousness and promote social justice. So back in 2001, I had a friend who was on the board of directors of the Global Fund for Women. And at that time, it's getting into a little politics now, but President Bush, the second one, instituted the global gag rule. And I was a fan of Nick Kristof, and I read how terrible that was for women around the world and how they would lose their life. So I decided to try and do some documentary work on that. And I went to China and Thailand and Mongolia for the Global Fund for Women, and I documented some of their grantees. And that started me on a long process that took me almost 14 years to
well, you came out, got a book.
To
Great.
Produce this book, Faces of Courage, portraits of women on the edge. And that required a lot of travel.
Well, give us, for example, how many continents have you been to?
Well, you know, like in Africa, God, I don't know how many trips I made to Africa, but numerous trips in maybe 7 or 8 countries.
Wow.
But more than once in many countries, like Kenya 3 times, Ethiopia twice, Tanzania 2 times or 3 times.
That's a lot of travel.
Malawi.
Let me remind our audience that they can call in to ask Mark any questions about his travel experience or even his book. The phone number here is 650-856-1491. So the average trip, would you say, was how long?
Well, going abroad, the average trip was, I would say, probably 3 weeks.
Wow, those are long trips.
Yeah, well, you know, when you're going so far,
that's true.
You just don't want to turn around and come back. You know, they're very, very long trips, and they're exhausting. You know, they're physically exhausting, and it's I don't really do really well with jet lag.
Well, I was going to ask a few jet lag questions. How do you recover from it? What do you do when you get to a foreign country and you're wiped out and you have to?
You know, it's interesting. I guess when I go to a place, I have plenty of energy during the day because I'm working and my adrenaline's going. What I have trouble is like really, really sleeping at night. That's really hard. So
do you take melatonin or?
Yeah, I take Ambien, but that's not. Personally, I don't think that's real sleep.
It's like
and
fake sleep.
It actually gives you a little bit of amnesia. I'm sure it does.
Someone said that Ambien is now being used as an Alzheimer's drug. They're experimenting with that.
Well, I don't know. Maybe does amnesia and Alzheimer's have something in common?
They may. Okay, so your sleeping must be difficult.
Sleeping's really, really hard. I mean, that's the hardest thing. And it takes a long time to get adjusted to sleeping. And also, if I'm working all the time, I'm so stimulated, it's really, really hard to just sleep. And
well, as we were prepping for the show, we talked a little bit about, you know, your baggage and your cameras. Tell the audience a little bit about some of the difficulties of traveling with.
Yeah, I have I take 2 heavy bags on board the airplane with me.
With your cameras in them.
The cameras and the computer. And I never, ever shipped them. And now, of course, you know, and I've had trouble getting on airplanes with...
Even now?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, even now, I mean, all the time, because they say, well, it's too heavy. So I've had little tricks, like I take some of the lenses out, put it in my coat pocket or something like that. Or,
you check your luggage, your clothing and stuff.
Yeah, of course. That you know, I just need to take what I absolutely essentially need. But there's some things I need also that are shipped. But you know.
Have you ever arrived and the cameras and the luggage haven't?
Well, the cameras are always with me.
Well, unless you have Well, that's true. I was gonna say
Cameras are
that's-
always with me. But no, I've been really lucky, really lucky. But I'm always very nervous and tense. I'm standing around the carousel to make sure that things are there. You know, it's always
scary.
stressful.
So when you get to a city, do you do some running or some exercises, or you stand in the
No.
light, or you just
No,
begin?
I don't. When I'm working, I'm really out, and it's physical. So it's I'm out. What's harder to do is to get back into the swing of things when you get home,
That's true.
because when I'm home, I just relax, and then I just want to sleep a lot. And
Plus, if you've
but-
been gone
but
2
the
or 3
best-
weeks,
but really the best thing to get time adjusted is just to be in the light and go out and exercise.
so
in
you
the
don't
light.
you don't keep your watch at what time do you go on, the regular time?
I go in the time of wherever I am. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about some of the worst travel experiences you've had in terms of advice you might want to give people who travel a little bit occasionally, not like you'd have, but what would be some of the things to look out for that can
Well,
make?
one thing to do is really try not to book on one of these online travel sites on the web, because if you ever have to change your flight for some reason, you can't change it directly with airline. You have to go through them, and they charge you an extra fee.
Yes, 100 to
and
200
also-
bucks.
Yes. No, I mean, they'll charge you more. They'll charge you a fee, and then the airline will charge you a fee.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. That's great
Yeah.
advice.
And so it's really much better just to book direct with an airline. I mean, you can go on those sites to see what the good, flights are, and the good, the timing and everything. But it's really best to book with the airline. And then it's also, if you think you're getting a seat on one of those travel sites, you're not, because the airlines usually don't recognize that. So I think that's
To
one
book
thing.
the regular airline, I bet you always, do you do it online or do you pay the phone fee?
No, I'll do it online. But if I have a complicated trip, I'll hire a travel agent. Because sometimes it's just too complicated. Some of the trips I've had.
Now, you often travel with someone, an assistant.
No,
Not anymore?
not abroad.
Not abroad.
When I was doing all my, corporate commercial work in the
Oh, okay.
States, I always had an assistant.
And they never had any problems either, I guess, if one would come and the other one didn't. That's a difficulty, I guess.
Yeah.
But
But what else can I tell you? Also, don't try and keep this. If you have a complicated trip, do whatever you can to keep the same airline, because if you miss a
that's
connection,
a good point.
then you really have to buy a new ticket, because the second airline won't be responsible for you missing
Oh, that's
the
true.
first airline flight. And that was like one of the worst experiences we had. But I had it's a very good idea to always have travel insurance.
Good. Let's talk a little bit about reentry. Gone for 2 or 3 weeks. You do have a family. What is it like returning? It must be very difficult, not only in energy level, but the person at home makes all the decisions and you're not there to
Yeah,
to contribute.
it's definitely not easy getting back home. I mean, it's funny, I'm sort of like an accidental location photographer, because I really like being home with my wife and everything. But for her, it's really very stressful. And for me too, when I go away, when I have to go on a big
Especially
trip.
for long trips. It's not like going for a week.
Especially going to, a place like Africa, which, it's not this, lots of places in Africa aren't the safest places to be. And
Well,
you
let's
can, and
talk
you
a
can
little
get
bit about
sick.
health. What do you do to
Yeah.
protect yourself
I
from?
take a whole medicine kit with me, but
Do you get
I've
the
gotten
shots too?
Well, of course, you have to have the shots. I mean, but that's not a big deal. I mean, because
Well, some
I've been immunized for a long time, and you have to renew it.
That's true.
But I've gotten sick a couple of times real bad,
That's not good.
and that's no fun. That's really awful.
Well, let's find out if our audience is sick. We can remind them to call in. I'm a little like the shopping network, but please use our telephone and call Mark for any questions. The phone number here is 650-856-1491. We're here with jobs that require travel, and our professional photographer, Mark Tuschman, is talking about his experiences traveling internationally. So you have gotten sick. Have you ever had to call a doctor?
Yes.
Oh, gee,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
because you
And
go to
actually,
places that are pretty
the
far.
first time I was in Africa was in Tanzania, and we went on a safari before my shoot, which is a bad idea. It's always a bad idea to do the job
To
first.
celebrate afterwards, right?
Yeah, but I had to do it that way because there was another job right afterwards. So anyway, I wound up getting dysentery, which was, and we called the doctor, and he misdiagnosed me, and he gave me Imodium, which is, that's another thing. You never take Imodium because it made the dysentery much worse.
Oh, gee.
So it turned out during the job I was working with some doctors, and I had to go to a clinic, a rural clinic, to get shots of was it Cipro or
Yeah, Cipro, right? There's
Yeah,
Cipro pills you can take with you
no?
as
But
well.
this was like intravenous shot. So I was pretty
Sick.
freaked out. I mean, I'm going to one of these clinics.
Very primitive.
So I always had to make sure that I was very fanatic that they opened up new needles and everything.
Well, one of the questions I didn't ask during our prep time is, do you think there are certain qualities that people have to take a job that requires lots of travel? Are there
You
certain
have
things?
to. Well, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, that we use the word travel, even though it means many different things, right? I mean, if I was telling you I was going traveling now to Italy, it wouldn't be for work, right? It would be
Right.
pleasure, vacation, whatever. But for work, it's a completely different
Oh, it
thing. So we
is.
really shouldn't even use the same word. And
Away on business, you can say. But
yeah, but I think you have to like airports and like airplanes and
and you have
hotel
to
rooms
be,
a lot.
I think, very patient. A lot of wait time. It's
There's a
like
lot
a
of wait-
hurry up and wait kind of
Well,
syndrome.
air travel's just, as that we all know, has just gotten worse and worse, and it's very unpleasant. And lots of times, when I was doing my corporate commercial work, I mean, it really was no fun traveling at all because I basically would have to go across the country to photograph a situation that was no different than a situation I could have photographed right here at home, right?
Except the corporate office wasn't here.
Yes, if the corporate office wasn't here or the plant wasn't here, but it wasn't that exciting. It was
Right.
just, you know,
So you need patience.
you
What else?
just need to be flexible.
I
And,
think that I
but
think
but
that
the
would
hard
be
thing too is when you travel, it's really hard on your body because it's hard to exercise, and it's hard to eat well, and it's
that
really
actually
hard.
is a
And I
very
think
good
it's
point. You need to be somewhat physically fit,
yeah,
or else you'll get wiped out all the time.
Yeah, it'll wipe you out. So it's not an easy thing to do, and it's if you're traveling, you're going to be giving up some of that.
That's true. Now, what kind of advice would you give someone? Obviously, I'm sure that our audience is going to be excited to see a professional photographer who, throughout his career, has been successful enough to have a book published and has traveled quite extensively. What advice would you give someone who knows that they're taking a job that they're going to be traveling a lot?
Well, you mean business travel,
Yes,
right?
business travel. This is not.
mean-
It's all business travel.
It's all
tonight.
business travel. Well, I have what advice? I guess relationship-wise, you have to make sure it's pretty okay with
Secure, right, good.
with your spouse, because it's really hard to go away and come back, go away and come back, and especially if you have young children,
That's
right?
true.
Which I remember the children would really miss me a lot, and I would really miss them a lot.
Well, we're having next month a couple that travel, a couple that
maybe-
barely see each other. I'm going to ask them
Maybe
the
that
same
keeps
question.
their relationship together.
It may be
You
one of those things.
you know.
I'm interested to find out if you think that, we talked a little bit about travel being different. Do you think that any part of the travel experience has gotten better, or has it all gotten worse?
Oh, I think the air travel's gotten much worse, much worse. I mean, I really dread flying anywhere in this country right now. I really do. And I prefer international travel because at least you're on a nice airplane that's much newer, and it's quieter, and with a little better service. And to me, like the trip across country is from East Coast to West Coast, especially is is really long. You're on a small airplane, and if you're on some of these major carriers, they're very, very poor.
Now, I'm sure that when you travel for nonprofits and stuff, are there restrictions on whether you can go business class and get more leg room? I guess I don't know what the...
No, I can't. Absolutely
can't.
not.
That's
Yeah,
tough then, too.
There's one pharmaceutical company I did a lot of worldwide work for, and they let me go business class, which was very, very nice.
Well, I had a gentleman on our show who worked for a company in the East Bay that would not let anybody go anything but coach, and they lost several key senior executives who quit over that alone.
Yeah, well, I could understand that, because it's, especially now, it is hard.
Now, do you do work on the plane? Can you read? Do you do
No, I
computer
don't
work?
do.
You do?
No, I just try to relax, catch up, watch movies, or I really don't do any work. Occasionally, I've edited some pictures on the airplane, but there's so much build up into actually getting on the airplane. Like when I'm on the airplane, I just try not to do anything.
I thought of something.
I might read a book or some magazines.
It occurred. What happens if one of your lenses break? I guess you're in places you can't replace these things.
Yeah, that's why I have to be redundant.
That's true. So you take more than one with you?
Oh, I take lots of lenses, but there's some key lenses. If they broke, I'd still be in trouble. But it's mostly I take more than one camera, of course.
Of course. And you need to be prepared for all kinds of contingencies.
Yeah, and you have to. I didn't mention, but you really have to bring a good medical kit with you.
Well, you talked a little about all your medicines, but
yeah.
I think that it would be very difficult to go to an underdeveloped country and try to take their medicines. I'm sure.
No.
I don't think I would do that.
No, you can't do that.
Well, you hear about people that have, break legs or have to have teeth pulled. They all want to come home to have it done rather than to get it done there. Talk a little bit about what one of my former guests did about some of the benefits of business travel. Everyone talks about how difficult it is. What kind of takeaways did you get from traveling all this much?
When I was traveling to do this book, it was really a different experience than traveling to doing all the corporate commercial
stuff, right.
work. It was very, very
and this
different.
Took 14 years, you said?
Well, a couple of years was putting the book together and raising the money to do it. And then it was about 2 years of trying. I got a grant from the Packard Foundation to do some of the work, so that took a couple of years to do. And then the reason it took so long was that I didn't just get on an airplane and land in another. I had to coordinate with a nonprofit NGO or foundation to document some of their work.
A lot of administrative work.
So there was a lot of convincing of these organizations that it was worthwhile to.
So that's one benefit, is you've made a difference with your contribution. What about food and sites? Do you get a chance to?
So when I did this work, it was really interesting because I got to see a lot of the world that most people don't see,
and even in being see either, I'm sure.
And even in being in, like if you go to Africa, when you think you go to Africa, most people think, oh, I'm going to go on a safari, but I wasn't doing that. I was going into health clinics and slums, and hospitals and maternity wards, and so I was getting in small villages. So I was really getting to see the real Africa and not.
And that's a benefit because many people
so
never...
it was a little hard always to come back because it's always hard to translate or share that experience with people who haven't been there.
Whose life is very different than that.
Yeah, so I thought that I was very, very privileged to be able to do that kind of work, and I still feel.
We have a call. This is Dr. Business. How can I help you?
Hi. I was just wondering, have you had any issues with language?
That's a great question. Let me ask my colleague.
Well, it's always better if you can speak the language, of course, but I have always someone with me who's a translator. So it, it's, that's how I get by. But, of course, it's better if you can speak the language.
Have you ever managed to learn a few words for each country you go to?
A few, but not, yeah, I'm so concentrated on making photographs that it's really hard for me to put my attention.
Anna, can I supplement your question by asking what about special customs and things that may be unique to that particular country? Do you?
Well, I have people with me who coach me or tell me things that I need to know. I mean, some places were like, not safe to photograph, and I was told that. Some of those times I can figure that out quite easily for myself.
Anna, while I have you on the air, do you have another question, or are you good?
Yeah, no, that's actually pretty much answers it because, I mean, having a translator there is a huge help.
Yeah.
Thank you for calling, and best of good luck to you. We just have a few minutes left, Mark. If you have any sort of points we asked about advice, what else would you sort of take away from all of this travel that you've done?
Well, for me, I mean, it's given me like a view of the
And
of
a great
the world,
career, too, of course.
of the world that I said I feel very privileged that I was exposed to see so much, and I've got an appreciation of how complicated things are, and that there are really no easy solutions to anything.
And also the concept that photography really can bring a whole new quote-unquote picture to the world.
Yeah, photography communicates. It is a universal language. I really feel it is. I have had exhibits in Florence and Copenhagen with this work, and here in San Francisco at the World Affairs Council. And I know how people really respond to the images, and it definitely has universal appeal, and it communicates on a deep level. So
it's worth all that time on the airplane and the
I mean,
you wouldn't do anything differently, would you?
No.
Maybe start earlier? Would you have done this earlier in your career?
Well, if sure, I would have. It would have been a lot better to start earlier.
Well, believe it or not, our time is up, and
Really?
I wanted to thank you very much. I want to thank Anna for calling. I want to remind everybody that we have a session on June 15th, and our guests are a married couple, an attorney female and a marketing male, who are coming to chat about what's life when both people travel. So we should get some new insight to that. I want to thank Mark for his participation. I want to thank my crew, and I want to wish everyone a good week and a happy month, and we'll see you all in June. This is Dr. Business signing off, and take care.